Hey, it's Chris, Leisure Games. Let's talk IP conversion into tabletops. Now, I'm going to be doing a couple of these videos. This first one is going to be on manga or anime that I'd love to see in the tabletop scene that isn't already there, but I'm also going to be doing TV shows as well as movies that I would love to see adapted to the table that have not been already, or that have been done already that I think need a redo because they just weren't done well enough. So this video is going to be numbers 10 through 6 of the anime and manga. Now, just to be clear, when I'm ranking these are in order. So number 10 would be my least most wanted right now. Number 1 is going to be my most wanted. So they're going to be in particular order, and you need to know that. So that'll help with the rankings. You'll understand a little bit more that way. And so, because like I said, it's going to be a little long, and I want to give, your eyes and ears a break from listening to me. We're going to break it up into 2 videos also, so that maybe, if you like it, you'll actually tune in for the next one and maybe throw me a subscription there. So anyway, on with the show. Let's just get into it. Disclaimer, I'm a big anime fan. I'm a big manga fan. I remember probably almost, what it would have been, 25 years ago maybe, plus or minus, when Dragon Ball Z would come on Saturday mornings at like 6 a.m. and I would wake myself up early, purposefully, to hear Dragon, Dragon, rock the dragon, Dragon Ball Z. Dragon, Dragon, rock the dragon, come get me. I'm not going to do the air guitar. No, I'm not going to embarrass myself that much. But I remember that, and that was what started me on the manga anime side of things, and then watching Dragon Ball Z as a kid, along with Yu-Gi-Oh! After school, when it was first coming out in America, was just transcendental in terms of my interest in eventually leading me to this direction in this hobby, and just as a nerd in general, so to speak. So without further ado, we will just go into number 10. Now you know a little bit more about me as well. So, number 10. Now, this one is probably a little bit under the radar if you're not super into them, but it's been one of the more-ish mainstream ones. Sword Art Online. What is Sword Art Online? Sword Art Online is an anime and a manga that is based in the future, where people connect into games using virtual reality. And not just virtual reality, but like whole body immersion virtual reality. And what happens is, after this new game gets sent out to a certain number of people, like a couple thousand people, all of a sudden they find out, long story short, that they can't disconnect from the game. The only way they can get out of the game is by either beating it or dying. Well, I'll just die then. Well, that's the problem, is if you die in the game, you die in real life. If they unplug you in real life, you die in real life. So, thus begins the whole series of being stuck in this game and coming to terms with the fact that you are stuck in the game for potentially the rest of your life. And the protagonist is, everything that you would expect. It's got some cool fight scenes. It's got some cool twists. It's not the deepest. It has some of the typical tropes that are in a lot of these games. But overall, I think it was really well done. There's a couple seasons. I think the first season is by far the best. The second 2 seasons, they sort of branch off into similar MMORPGs online. There's a gun one, and then there's like a fantasy one. This one is more, the first season especially, is more medieval-ish with, knights and that sort of thing. So I really liked it the best, but what would this look like in terms of a tabletop game? Well, there was already a tabletop game. It was a not very well done sort of, I don't want to say cash-in, but it just wasn't that good. It was on Kickstarter. It raised a bit of money, but there was no reason to back it on Kickstarter. The exclusives were something like foils, and the gameplay was relatively lackluster in terms of a cooperative, dice rolling, little mitigation, lots of randomness, boss battler. So I would love to see this taken to the next level as a full-on, full-developed cooperative game, level up system, or even just something like Exceed, where there are just a couple characters with a season and you can manifest it that way. I'm not sure what else you would do with it because it is pretty generic. So it would take someone more creative than myself to come up with some unique mechanism, but I think overall the concept is great. I just don't think the execution was done well, and so I'm a little disappointed because I feel like if you were exposed to that at all, that might turn you off when it actually was a relatively good anime in general. So Number nine. Now, this is not one of my personal favorites, but I think unlike Sword Art Online, I would be really intrigued because I think you could do some really crazy things in a tabletop implementation of this. And now this is One Punch Man. It sounds stupid, right? Yeah, the original drawings were horrible, but it has amassed a cult following. It developed a manga where they redid the art, and then it's got an anime now. The premise of it is it's this ordinary guy, and there are these heroes, and they're ranked, and depending on what their rank, they fight, the villains, and everybody's ranked in these ranks, in these tiers, and he wants to be a superhero, but he's super weak. So all of a sudden, flash forward, this guy appears, and it's the same kid a couple years later, and all of a sudden he starts beating everything that is put in front of him. And at first they think he's faking it. They think he's not really the one beating things. But the premise of it is hence the name One Punch Man, is he beats all of the enemies, no matter how tough, with just one punch. So what you could do with that on a tabletop setting is, could you imagine like sort of a reverse RPG, a reverse deck builder, where you have to try and do the least amount of damage. You have to sort of try to keep the enemies alive as long as possible because you're too strong. Like, just flip things on its head. And I think if you had someone, again, much more creative and immersed with the ability to design a mechanic like that than myself, I think that would be amazing to try and do, because we are built in this tabletop hobby and scene and games to do the opposite. I played Marvel Legendary tonight with my 6-year-old, and you're gradually building up and up and up, trying to get stronger cards and stronger cards and stronger cards and cull the weak ones. What if you had to do sort of the opposite, where you had this super powerful thing, but you had to use it in a way that it didn't try and knock things out? So you had to mitigate it negatively. I can't really think of a whole lot that does that in our, you know, hobby. And how you would do that, that's beyond me. I think the premise itself is something uh, where if you have ingenuity, it could work really well. And plus, it's just a really funny concept when you see it in action. So if you're not familiar with it, it's worth checking out. So take that for what you will. Now, number eight. This one should have been higher, but it's not, even though it is really amazing. This is Hunter x Hunter. Now, if you're not familiar with Hunter x Hunter, it's been around since like 1998. So 22 years, and the problem is the last decade or so, it really hasn't gone anywhere. The authors had issues. I don't pretend to know all of what's going on, but it's had super long, like years hiatuses. And it suffered because of that, the popularity at least, and especially with all of the other rise of great successful animes in the 2010s and right around there. But it is still one of the classics. It is still amazing in its writing and the development of the characters. And basically there's this kid Gon, and his dad is the top hunter of all hunters, where hunters are these specialists who are basically the elite of the elite, and they get missions to do whatever, assassinate, capture monsters, fight monsters, just anything that is super. Imagine any job in our society done to a super elite level. That's what basically hunters are. And they have to pass a hunter exam, which is this super rigorous, tough exam, and his progression through that would make a perfect RPG. It would make a perfect co-op game because he makes friends and allies, and he fights several groups. There's several story arcs. There's a big story arc towards the end of where things have left off now that would just all fit a narrative structure and campaign very, very well. But it's fallen under the radar. And I think its IP has fallen in interest because of those hiatuses. And I still want to give it credit because I really enjoy it, and I think a lot of other people enjoy it. So in that sense, I don't think anime is terribly different from board games. It's the what have you done for me lately, the, relative hotness that everyone focuses on, and things like this that have had hiatuses or that have undergone revampment or, tweaks often get overlooked. So I think this sort of falls under that realm, and I just don't think it gets its due diligence as sort of a predecessor to a lot of the other more successful ones since then. So that's why I'd like to see it more developed. Now, number 7 is, speaking of the hotness, boom, fast transition there, My Hero Academia. Now, this is the most recently started anime, and I think manga actually probably too, without having done all my research. So someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But it is the hotness lately. It has all of the tropes. It has all of the excitement. Now this story is a bit different though, in the sense that everybody in the world almost, except for very few people, are superheroes or have superpowers to some extent. Now, to what extent they have them determines what they're able to do and how they interact with society. But you got superheroes on one side, supervillains on the other, and they clash, obviously. So the story starts off as you have the pinnacle of superheroes giving his power to a kid that was born without powers. And that is how the story begins, which is a drastic difference than a lot of the other stories where it's built up, it's built up, it's built up. You got power creep, you got power creep. Well, the power creep in this sense is this kid has the strongest powers, but he doesn't know how to use them. He doesn't know how to do them at all. He is just, boom, blank sheet. And it's his trials and tribulations starting in school and going on from there. And this is like an open sandbox type situation, or even an LCG type situation that I could see, because we're all looking for the next big thing. And I think a lot of these IPs would work very well with LCGs. Get away from CCGs. A couple of these have been done in CCGs that I'm either talking about or have talked about. And we all hate the CCG model for the most part, because you can get really screwed out of a lot of money, and it's a completionist thing more than anything else. At least for me personally, it was. So an LCG model with the success of like Arkham Horror and Lord of the Rings, I really think that is ripe for the picking for someone to develop their own unique version of it, sort of like Marvel Champions has done. People were like, Marvel Champions is not going to be that good. It's, it's going to be like superhero light. It's going to be, it's really finding its niche. And I think you have to be willing, and I think this comes with the publisher, the money, the purse strings behind anyone developing this, is especially with an IP like this, or a couple of the ones that are higher on the list, and you'll know why I say that later, you have to be willing to give them time to develop. And that's what Marvel Champions had done. Marvel Champions was not the most complex, it wasn't not the most rigorous game when it came out. But similar to other games in the past, they have added elements and added terms and terminology and features and mechanics as the game has progressed. I mean, I look at Marvel Legendary, staying within the same IP as I played just the base game, and as my son and I have been adding other expansions and having to look up those bolden terms each time and be like, hey, what does this one do? I don't have a clue. Do you remember what this one does? No? Okay, good. Let's look it up. So that is what they could do with an IP like this. As you're adding heroes, as you're adding hero abilities, as you're adding villains, as you're adding villain abilities, these IPs are ripe for that. There is so much lore already built. People don't have to build a lore to begin with. And isn't it easier to do it? I mean, you're going to have to deal with the IP issues, but if you can do it with Marvel, it's been around for decades and decades and decades. I think you can do it with around an anime or a manga that's been around for maybe at most a decade. My 2 cents, but I think that would be a perfect fit. Now, this one, I wanted to put this one higher for number 6. I really wanted to, because in terms of engagement, in terms of I'm sitting on the edge of my seat wondering what's going to happen, this one is probably number 1 or number 2 on the list easily. But because it's not as long, because it's ending soon, the manga isn't, but the anime is. So if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. This one already has a decently well-made board game, but I think the possibilities of what you can still do with it are tremendous. So that's why Attack on Titan. Man, if you're not familiar with this and you like this sort of thing at all, if you like anything I'm talking about in this video and you have not seen this, go get Netflix for a month and binge the first 3 seasons. The gist of Attack on Titan is that humans are in this 3-tiered city, and they are the last humans on Earth. And there are these big monstering unintelligent things called titans outside of them constantly trying to get in and eat them. That's right, eat them. And it is the story of survival and death and destruction and blossoming birth and hope. And it keeps you on the edge of your seat because, unlike a lot of American dramas, this is a whole nother side tangent. American dramas, bang bang, good guy gets bad guy loses, good guy wins, good guys always go home, good guys take out the bad guys with their handguns, the bad guys have machine guns, and they're like stormtroopers from A New Hope. They can't hit the broadside of a barn. This, like a lot of other series that I've seen from overseas, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to live. You don't know who's going to die. You don't know anything. And the second you realize that going in, when that first character dies that you really were rooting for, you realize that deep down, this isn't like a lot of the other things you've seen. This isn't Dragon Ball Z where, you know, somebody's coming back 3 or 4 times from life. They're gone. And the spin on this whole apocalyptic last people on Earth is so well done that it has just kept me watching and watching and watching. And the 4th season, the last of the anime, manga's continuing, like I said, is coming out, I think, in the next month or 2. And it's one of those shows that you want to binge all at once, but at the same time, I want to savor it over a long period of time because they are only like 20, 22-minute episodes. By the way, with all of these, friends don't let friends dub. So, you sub them. Side tangent. So, what could you do with Attack on Titan? Now, why is Attack on Titan unique? Well, they've got this game that's out there already where you're kind of scaling the Titan, trying to knock down the Titan because the Titans regenerate. And I left that part out, right? You know, bury the lead there. And if you don't cut them at the base of the neck where their vulnerable spot is deep enough to cause them not to regenerate, they just regenerate. And so all the damage you've done is pointless. And so this game takes that concept as Titans because what they have to do is they fly around on these little jetpacks that are attached at their hips that shoot off cables that they can hook onto buildings to and use their swords to just whoosh. And so that is the mechanic that this game tries to incorporate. But again, I think you could take an open sandbox type world where you could have some progression, you could have some sandbox type elements, because there's a lot of other stuff going on. As you can imagine, we humans are not good at getting along with each other, even in end of world type scenarios, as we've seen numerous times in videos and properties all over the place when that happens. And so there is a lot of that going on as well. And you could make even a Dune-esque type of game with Dune Imperium that's coming out with those elements where you've got worker placement, you've got some battling, you've got some resource gathering, you've got some other hidden stuff. No spoilers here. So I would love to see that fully blossomed. That is one of the few games on this list that actually already has a halfway decent game, but the potential is there for so much more. That is what this list is truly about. It's about the potential that these IPs have that I feel like is being underutilized. And this is a big one that, again, if we're going to speak of the hotness, you're going to speak of striking while the iron is hot, striking while the iron is super hot, and this is one of the hottest animes and mangas out there right now. Somebody should snatch this up. Somebody creative that can find a way to incorporate how these guys battle the Titans, the dynamics of the politics within the last human settlement, the other dynamics that go in there. I'm being very careful to avoid spoilers. So I think, again, it's ripe for possibility. It just depends on the person, the place, and how it's actually done. And I realize that putting this out there sort of, makes it sound super easy. I realize that a lot of the issues with already existing IPs is you're trying to adapt an IP, or you're trying to adapt mechanisms to fit an IP when you may not be able to fit them very well, sort of like square peg round hole. And so I think with a couple of these games, like I've mentioned, I think you're just going to have to develop unique mechanisms that aren't out there already. And that requires innovation. And frankly speaking, I'm surprised that some of the Japan publishers have not done something similar. But the issue being, of course, I'm sure is why they haven't done it, is cost. A lot of these IPs are just going to cost you tons and tons and tons of stuff. So if you don't have a mechanism already fit for it, why take the risk? So it's catch-22 there. So there you go. That is number 6 through number 10. Spoilers, number 1 through number 5, I'm going to have some strong opinions about. You're not going to have a hard time guessing most of the ones in number 5 through number 1. In fact, I think you could probably guess 4 of them right now. The 5th one, though, which is actually my number 1, I bet you can't guess. I bet you can't guess it. I'll give you a hint. It's in some of my other videos. There's been references and appearances in some of my other videos. If you can guess it, more props to you. Throw it in the comments down below. You know, I really hope that somebody can guess it. But the other four are just the 4 pillars of sort of what people think of when they think of anime now in the 2010s, but now even the 2020s. So that is going to be upcoming soon as well after this one comes out, maybe a week or 2 later. So if this interests you at all, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What animes aren't going to make the list? I mean, I've probably got 4 or 5 other animes or mangas that are not going to make this list that easily I could swap out probably 8, 9, or 10 for and have swapped them in there very easily and said this one deserves it almost as much. I mean, I've got one right now I think that I would make the honorable mention of Rurouni Kenshin. I mean, talk about you know, getting level 99 involved as season 6 with Rurouni Kenshin and the characters from that. Holy Kenshin Himura, Hitugen Ryu no Hirameki, throw me one of those. Anyway, okay, so I'm getting off my nerd tangent. As always, thank you for being willing to watch, like, comment, subscribe, whatever, under the sun. I appreciate it all. So thank you for taking the time. I really do appreciate it as a person who's just doing this for fun. So have a great day. Be positive. It's hard. Stay classy. See you next time.